You're listening to the audio portion of Workshop Wednesdays. Workshop Wednesdays is a free live discussion about topics affecting accountants, bookkeepers, and business owners. You can join the ABO group in Facebook to participate live Wednesdays at 10 a.m. Pacific Time. Just search for ABBO in Facebook. This podcast is brought to you by Schoolofbookkeeping.com, where you will learn, grow, and build a thriving bookkeeping practice. We have hundreds of lessons with almost every aspect of the industry. Start your free month today at Schoolofbookkeeping.com. Well, welcome everybody to another Workshop Wednesday, where it's all about casual conversations for serious workflows, brought to you by Schoolofbookkeeping.com, which is where you can keep learning QuickBooks your way, the way you want, however you want to. If you want some guidance, we got that. If you want to do it on your own, we got that too. But we have an extra special guest today with us, Shanna Quinn, whose birthday is today. So happy birthday, Shanna.
Thank
you want to introduce yourself?
My name is Quinn. I am owner of East Orlando Bookkeeping for contractors, and upgraded turning 10 years old this month. So that's very exciting.
Congratulations.
Contractors, you probably have a lot of billable expenses, I'm guessing.
Well, for some of them, right? It depends on what kind of contractor and how we're invoicing that I'm working with. But yes, we deal with a lot of billables and a lot of cost codes and all of that fun stuff.
Now, you're actually referenced in books, aren't you?
I am. I am in Sean Van Dyke's Profit First for Contractors book. So yeah.
Ooh.
So you're like a use case or an example?
I think at the time there's not a lot of accounting specialists, I don't think, that work with contractors. And I think it becomes a little bit more slim when you're looking at those that specialize working with contractors in general and doing Profit First.
Oh, that's
Well,
cool.
I'm just glad I'm one of the only ones, you know.
I'm just learning Profit First right now.
Oh, it's fantastic.
Yeah. I had heard about it for quite some time, and I'm like, you know what? Let me actually get that book and read it. And oh my gosh, I think I might start implementing it for myself.
It's a great program for my contractors, especially because their mindset is very different from accounting professional.
Yes.
Not as critical thinking, most of them. With their wife to help me with the counterbalance of office stuff, or an office manager. The men are just not as organized, I want to say. Their focus is on the building of the business and the building in general.
Building of the buildings.
So,
Now, how did you find yourself gravitating towards contracting in general as a specialty?
I think probably because my dad is a contractor. The way we would sit down, and I was the numbers kid my whole life, and he was a contractor, but also a numbers nerd. So we would sit down and draw up stuff and work on things and budgets and stuff. And I know that sounds really stupid because that was like for fun.
Well, you only have to say the word PayPal, and then Rachel gets really excited.
I think that's fun. Bookkeeping is fun. I love bookkeeping.
Yeah, it's a great way for me I'm not like diagnosed OCD, but I'm pretty sure there's a good bit of it in me. So this helps me counterbalance my life and not taking so much. I can get my OCD out on my work and need of perfection in my work, and then I can clock out and be okay with the fact that my house
laundry's not done.
And
excellent. And I just want to talk one more thing about contracting in QuickBooks in general before we dive into our topic du jour. There's a mindset out there that you cannot do job costing in QuickBooks Online, but you say otherwise, right?
I do. There's workarounds in it, especially for the clients that I have that are operating on the balance sheet side, like a home builder, as opposed to a remodeler. So there's workarounds on it, but the advanced one is a great option because I can easily export live documents and live reports and have taught them how to do it very easily. It'd be great if QuickBooks came out with that option for the project screen to show us balance sheet balances and breakdowns. But for right now, this works fine, and it worked great for the clients that I have. The biggest one, which I think is the leeway probably into our topic, the home builder I worked with for about 5 years out in Texas. They did about 115 to 150 homes on an annual basis. So we were doing a lot. There was a lot of stuff that went in and out of the books. And there was obviously the need to track all of that, whether you're a little small home builder doing a few homes a year, or you're doing 160 homes a year, the need to still be profitable is the same. They were very particular about how they wanted to see reports, and we did it just fine, and it worked for them, and it's been a great tool. I use QuickBooks Online for every single client that I have now. I do too. Finally moved over to online from desktop, which was
So the last one that you were trying to move over is where our story, our saga begins here.
yeah.
It was a large enterprise QuickBooks company file, and you had tried to move it over yourself. And what happened? So what was the result of that?
So this particular one had multiple companies, and so I moved over the smaller of their companies into the online file, and was had the nice surprise to learn that everything, even journal entries somehow, and deposits, and everything related to a job somehow got marked as billable. And which was a lovely surprise. I was actually really glad to find it on the smaller of the companies, because then I only had 100 and something homes to clear that out with before moving on to the other one, which had, like I said, 150-ish homes on average a year, and their data dated back for 10 years, I think. So there would be a lot more to clear up manually.
So what Sean is talking about there is, I'm just sharing my screen here. This is just a sample company. This is not anybody's company per se, but when you look at the sales section inside of QuickBooks Online, there's this money bar across the top, and it's got how much is in estimates all the way to what's been paid and deposited. And there's this section in here called Unbilled Income, right? Which, if I were to click on it, it filters the whole thing for what is quote unquote unbilled income. And there were, in this particular case, there's a couple charges in here, one for $30 and one for $10. If I were to drill in on them and open it up, and it looks like right before we got onto the live here, there was some login issues with QuickBooks Online. So I may not be able to show this exactly the way I'd hope, but if I were to edit this charge, yep. Is okay. So it's a delayed charge, and do I have here the companies here? And what's ultimately happening here is that when you have charges, or when you have transactions that are categorized to a customer and they're marked as billable, then that's what comes into this dollar amount, is unbilled income, because you're going to assume, or QuickBooks is assuming at this point, that you're going to charge that back to the customer and recoup that in some way. So that's why it's on the sales side of things. Now, in in your instance, Shanna, what was that dollar amount showing for you for these other these other companies?
As in how many transactions or how much in value of transactions?
The
Yeah.
value of those transactions,
Um,
both really, yeah.
For the first company that I converted over, it was about 800, 900,000. But for the second company, I think we were at 20 million or something.
Yeah.
Oh boy. It goes into like an unearned income account on the balance sheet.
It goes nowhere until
Yeah.
you do until you do something with it.
So it's actually it's just in there.
They're not actually financially posting transactions.
Okay.
The cycle of the QuickBooks workflow cycle is I have an expense or a charge. I go to Home Depot and I buy stuff for my client, and I'm going to mark that as an expense and track it back to the customer. And then you have this additional checkbox that says billable, right? And you're marking that as a billable expense so that when you go to create an invoice, those billable charges and time and other costs that you want to recoup back to the customer are just sitting there in the drawer on the right side,
Yeah.
just waiting to be like, okay, I want to be income.
I guess I was thinking about like those have already been recognized as expenses on the P&L.
Yeah.
That could then be billed back to the client. But I guess I was thinking about that term that you just said, which is unearned
Yeah, it's called
revenue.
unbilled income.
Unbilled income. So that's I guess I was thinking maybe time charges or something like that.
It could be.
It could
Okay,
be.
okay.
It could be any transaction that has that check mark.
Okay.
Except
Yeah.
in the desktop file we were using, it didn't actually show me that
Right.
it was checked. So
Is something that normally happens when you do a conversion, or is this just something
Yeah.
gone awry?
No, this is a nuance, right? So
Uh-huh.
to Shauna's point, in desktop, there is no such thing as this money bar that shows unbilled income.
Mhm.
So if you don't know that you have all this stuff sitting waiting to be billed, it's not going to bubble up to the surface until you convert to QuickBooks Online, because the QuickBooks Online will see that checkbox. And let me just share here for a second here. I've got two things showing here. So I've got a QuickBooks desktop sample file here. So here's a check, right? And they've got general administrative utilities. They've tracked it. And this is the culprit here. I don't know if you can see it. It's this
Yep,
tiny
yep.
check mark, and it says billable with a question mark. Is it billable? And if it's checked, then that's what you're telling QuickBooks, that this
Yep.
is a billable expense that will ultimately be billed back to the customer. In desktop, if you have it checked or unchecked, it doesn't make a difference, because there is no such thing that shows up on your sales transaction screen that lets you know that you have $26 million worth of unbilled charges. But there is
that screen. Ultimately, it is a little confusing because, like, even just looking at it, that term of unbilled income makes me feel like it's unearned, i.e., balance sheet. But really, it's just a queue of things you can bill back to clients.
it is an on-deck circle of okay, you're not in the game yet. That's the next step, is that if I were to create a sales transaction for that customer, then I would want to have these unbilled charges be part of that next sales transaction. So in your case, Shauna, these were not charges that were eligible to be recouped. This was basically a situation where they shouldn't even existed. if we were to move all this over, there would be a $26 million bar on their money bar. That would be awful. Very distracting. What do I do with these things?
It's confusing.
Yeah.
To non-accounting professional that's looking at it, it's confusing. It's not a clean move, which is what I wanted to be able to do. Or have it look clean, have it be as accurate as possible, and having them direct to a certain screen, and then there this large number. You're like, what? What's
Yeah. So
ignore that.
And you can only say ignore that for so long before somebody doesn't ignore it.
Yeah.
So you want to clear those things off. So fortunately for Shanna, she knew the solution was, okay, I can go in, the options are, once it moves over and you have this amount in there, I can go into each of these transactions and uncheck that. Well, that's a lot of clicking.
One by one by one.
Right.
Now you can imagine the accumulation of what makes up $26 million. And then that was, if we just accounted for expenses, because somehow deposits were being marked as billable too, which was the really odd question of like what happened. If you took those deposits out, which were essentially their sale, like the revenue from the sale of that home. So it was between $250,000 to $600,000, $700,000, which that value decreases your overall billable amount. Is getting it back in. If you took those out, we were probably like 3 or 4 times what it was reflecting.
All right. Now, QuickBooks has a kind of a secret utility, which is this URL that I just typed in there. So the way you get to it, so you can't navigate to it, which is part of the challenge, right? You kind of have to know the secret.
Wow, I never knew this.
Which is basically at the end of the web address, whatever that happens to be. So you've got qbo.intuit.com/app/whatever, right? So whatever page that you're on, homepage, it'll say homepage. Invoice, it'll say invoices, right? So if you change that to manage billable expense, even though you want to manage billable expenses, you just manage billable expense. This screen comes up, which will allow you to put in a date. All right. So I'm just going to choose today and see if this actually works. So it'll be nice. Because these were actually delayed charges, I doubt they would. But it allows you to put in a date. You hit save. And what QuickBooks, in theory, would do is go through all of those prior to that date and remove the checkbox.
Yes.
So that is great when it works.
Wait a minute. Are you potentially it might not work?
And there's reasons, right? And that's what we're going to talk about, is why this wasn't working for Shanna, because she knew this. She would go into that. Oh no, now I'm can't access. This is the shenanigans that's going on with QuickBooks these days.
Yeah, I'm having trouble with QuickBooks right now too.
Our timing was horrible. So it's still there, right? Because these are actually delayed charge transactions. I'm curious if I were just to create a check here. Now QuickBooks is not going to behave because it's funky. But let's see, we don't want a Canadian vendor, but we do want a category. Just going to use advertising. And we're going to put in the project, which was 123 schedules, and it's $100, and it is billable. This is the condition that would happen, right? And I'm going to put it for the end of last year. Save and close. So in theory, when I go back to my all sales and refresh. Drum roll. Oh, QuickBooks. It's there for $150. There it is. Okay, so it did update it to now $190.73 with those other things. So now if I go back to that manage billable expense, and if I were to choose the end of last year and hit save, I would expect that check mark to go away because it qualifies as an option to remove that check. We shall see. But while this is doing it, so there's, when you convert from desktop to online, whether you've, as long as you haven't billed these billable expenses back to your clients, they'll come back into that unbilled income section. And the challenge is that this tool really doesn't work for that because of the nature of the desktop moving to QuickBooks Online with regards to inactive list elements, right? This won't be able to work if something is inactive. So if your customer is inactive, an account is inactive, anything that is inactive in that, because QuickBooks, if you tried to remove the checkbox manually, and that was the case, you get that red banner at the top that says something's inactive on this transaction.
Hate that.
Yeah.
And then there's a lot of peeling back the layers of the onion to determine what customer is inactive. Do I have to activate them? Is it the account? And then having, yeah, exactly. Go ahead.
Is it that now if it was a whole bunch of billable expenses in there that had not been converted from QBO, and let's say they're all active items, then it should work no problemo.
In theory, yes.
Okay.
And here we go. It's still there. So something is still active. So I wonder if I just were to edit now. I don't want to tempt fate here with QuickBooks. And that's part of the
a very sensitive tool that maybe really only works under ideal circumstances.
And it doesn't necessarily tell you what the problem is. It either works or it doesn't.
Closes it out. It doesn't give you an error. Right. Unless you only have one at a time that you're targeting by that date selection. It's not going to give you an error message. It's just going to cycle through, and then you're going to go here and just and nothing actually happened. There's no report that shows here's what went wrong, here's what needs to get fixed for this to happen properly.
So this is
it's a little worrisome, honestly, seeing that bar there with the title unbilled income. It makes me feel like maybe an unknowing person might go in there and instead of wanting to just simply take the check mark off and make them non-billable, they might want to delete things, which that's not what you need to do. It's just a matter of making billable non-billable.
When there's a lot of them, when I was researching other ways to approach this, I've watched several videos that somebody was like, you just have to go in, do the invoice, and then delete the invoice. I use QuickBooks for, like I said, all my clients now, and I have tons of remodelers that we do T&M for, time and material plus markup. You delete the invoice, you're just putting the billable back in. So
and
in addition to the fact that if it's not set up properly with your products and your cost codes aren't directing themselves back to the right income account, and instead, in this case, this client, because they didn't even know things were getting marked billable, and I didn't know because there was none of my transactions were showing me that they were being check marked. Which in QuickBooks, it shows you only when you selected that option. It's not happening in the background. Desktop, it was happening in the background for us. And so when I moved everything over. I've got all these invoice or all these things. I went to go generate one invoice and was checking my balance sheet, making sure I'm staying in. And then I realized everything, because they didn't have it marked for billable or was not that up. Everything actually in the desktop had been set up for the first option when you're setting your items up actually is your income account. And it doesn't look like it should be your income account because which is how the process actually happened. Your setup of items and cost codes in QuickBooks Online too. There's the option that you're going to buy it or sell it, but it doesn't necessarily lay that out properly for you. Every single cost code they had was pointing only to an income account. And that income account was the balance sheet, right? Like our CIP or WIP account, whatever you refer to that as. So then when I went to go invoice, it was putting it back in there.
Yeah, we've had that issue before too. That's very frustrating.
Yeah.
When a product service item like that is pointing to a balance sheet account.
Yeah.
Now, is there any other external tool or something like that that you can use to wipe out the the billable status?
Yeah. So Saasant.
I'm just going to ask.
This is where Shanna reached out and said, does anybody know another way? And I'm like, oh, Saasant transactions should be able to do the thing because all we needed to do is to remove.
Yeah.
Saasant Online has a great way to modify transactions. They also have the ability to live edit. So basically you'd be pulling things out into Saasant, modifying the field or the column or whatever it is that you're looking to do, and then just pushing it back into QuickBooks Online. The problem here is that we still have the same problem with inactive elements, right? So QuickBooks is going to say no, regardless of how much you want it to do that for that particular transaction. It's not going to remove that checkbox or that billable state of the transaction if you have something that is prohibiting it from doing that, an inactive list element, customer, project, or account, or anything else that transaction might be touching that is inactive. Unfortunately, we couldn't do this inside of QuickBooks Online post-conversion because of that same problem that the managed billable expenses was having. So the only other option at that point was we got to do this in desktop, right? Prior to converting. So on my desktop machine, so let me stop sharing QuickBooks Online and we'll go over to the desktop, which surprisingly has not restarted. So I was wondering if this was going to maintain a good option or not. But Saasant also has a desktop component, which is the ability to basically do the same thing that Saasant Online transaction does, but in the desktop case. So what we were able to do is export from the desktop file these transactions that were, and we used this report in QuickBooks Desktop. Get out of the way here. There we go. So this unbilled cost by job report is a really great report to start from because that is, as the name implies, anything that is a cost that is unbilled, right? And it's doing it by job. So it's like sorting these out by job. So what I was doing with Shanna was I went in here and changed the total by to be by year or by transaction type. And then what you can do is then you can see how much we're dealing with by year, right? So in this particular case, if we wanted to do that, we could pull out the journal entries from 2022 modify that field and then just re-upload it back into the desktop file with that option unchecked. Then when we convert it over to QuickBooks Online, it's not unbilled income. It's not in that state. So much better of a circumstance.
But that's something that you'd have to know
Yeah.
of time. Because in Shanna's situation, she's saying she didn't realize that all those unbilled
Yeah.
were in there. But
Well,
I guess it's one of those things to add to your list of before you convert, look in there and see, are there any unbilled expenses? And if so, you know, do you want those coming over to QBO in that conversion?
Exactly. If I run this report on this particular company, the grand total is a negative. So this is all sorts of transactions that are sitting, and for sure, this is a conversation starter. We're like, why do you have negative unbilled costs by job?
They hire people.
Yeah, exactly. That would be, whatever it is, it's not unbilled costs.
Right.
And because they have a lot of journal entries, that would probably lead me into that conversation of how these got in here, who's entering these transactions. Is this an adjustment that was done by the accountant or the tax professional or somebody that's not in the scope of work? And maybe these shouldn't be at all. And that's what we discovered in Shanna's case, is that there were tons of journal entries going to asset accounts that weren't even income. They weren't even expenses. Like they weren't costs. They were just being tracked in that fashion. And that check mark gets checked sometimes without people realizing that it got.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to say, is maybe it's so tiny and maybe somebody inadvertently had it on like default checked box instead of, you know what I mean?
So there's lots of conditions that could have caused that workflow to happen, but this is one of those things that bubbles up to the surface because of the differences between the two platforms of desktop versus online. So that's how we had to do this. And this was quite a project because we had to do it in a fashion of, because the way the Saasant transaction works is you can only do this by transaction type. So we started with that report, sorted it by,
and by date.
Yeah, we had to export the transactions through the magic of find and replace in Excel. We just found the billable status for everything that was in that transaction type and replaced it to not billable.
And not to cut you off, Did too, but there was two different fields on the reports that we're exporting. That was one with like billable expenses, which was tied directly to an expense account or to any account, and then there was the item billable. So there was two fields, 2 columns worth of data that you still had to look for and make sure you updated them properly to say non-billable and instead of billable. So what column you're looking for and checking for. So it was a lot.
And what about the line maximum at a time with Saasant?
I didn't have any problem. It was more of a timeout. As far as the number of transactions, I just decided to do it by year, depending on whether or not there was a lot of transactions. Sometimes if in Shanna's case, there were some credit card credits that was small smattering that was for a large period of time. So I did do all of those at once. But it's a faster process than you doing it manually.
Yeah.
But it's not a super fast process. It took the better part of a weekend to do this, to handle all of this, because there were a lot of bills, there were a lot of journal entries, there were a lot of transactions, And it was, if you really want to nerd out on this type of stuff, I could sit here in the desktop and watch this report refresh as Saasant was going through and marking those transactions as not billable anymore. So I knew it was working, right? It was just a matter of it was going through 1,000 lines of detail and updating it. And it was updating transactions that didn't fall into this category because I didn't want to miss something.
Right.
So it took a little longer than probably was necessary because of the mountain of bills that were in there that weren't marked as billable, but it still had to process those things. So I just wanted to be thorough in that whole process.
We were going back. This company has been in business since, this company in particular has been in business since 2001. So I had already condensed the file years ago when I first started working with them down to 2016 to an audit period is how I judged it. And then we broke it down and we actually condensed it when we're trying down to 2018. It doesn't sound like a lot, but when they're doing 150 homes on average a year and all of the expenses that go into it, it was a lot of transactions.
Yeah. I wonder if you can do this, in Right Tool. I doubt it.
Yeah. I mean, again, you'd
run into
have
your
the same
issue.
problem.
Yeah. If you have,
You'd have the-
if you have archived items, then that's not going to work. Or inactive.
And especially a company that old. I have clients that I've worked for that their companies are only 5, 6, 8, 9, 10 years old, but they've gone through cost cuts, right? Like they're always like, oh, I've got this new project. Let's add these and these and let's get rid of that. They haven't landed on the fact of here's a list that I'd like to just stick with. They're constantly changing their minds. So some of my clients, I might have 1,000 inactive cost codes because they really wanted detail. Now let's just keep it simple. And then they realize, get back to detail again. So it's,
I don't even think they have it because I'm looking under the Batch Pro and I don't see that. There's like Batch edit lots of stuff, but not that. Maybe it's because it's not in a register.
Yeah. And if this goes on if you're not at the point where you can catch this before you've converted to QuickBooks Online and it's gone months or the customer's, okay, I can't stand seeing this dollar amount on my sales transactions anymore.
Yeah.
I really need, it's a year later or something like that. Then
business changes. Someone else comes in and you're like, let's just do this to get this out of the way. And then they've created a much bigger mess than they.
Yeah. God forbid they go in and delete expenses and stuff. Not info.
Yeah.
So at that point, then you're going to need to uncover those layers of the onion of making things active. And you could use Saasant online transaction to do that. Go through your customers, make them all active. Go through your accounts, make them all active, right? So that they are active in bulk. And then you go in and then mark them off through Saasant online transaction, which that does have a limit of the number of transactions that you can do, because you're paying, that's what you're paying for, is the number of times that it's going to change something. So they give you credits. The most common is 5,000. And then you have others that you can add on from there. Desktop does not have any kind of limit. You can connect to however many company files that you want and do all those sorts of things. So it ends up being a value, right? Very similar to the QuickBooks Desktop, where you can have more companies and you're just paying for the software license. Same kind of model there. So those are the manners of ways that you can modify these, manage the billable expenses. And Shanna, you did bring up another workaround, which is just create invoices for these customers and bring them in. But again, you have the same problem, right? If you're going to make if a customer is inactive or a vendor was inactive, you're going to have those same problems where it's not going to be able to remove that checkbox by doing that. And then you've got all of the other post creating an invoice problems.
And then desktop, you can. I think I did a couple in there to try to, that's when I realized it was creating negative amounts. So when I looked at to see how everything was mapped properly again, I went in because these are old cost codes that were made inactive before me. I went in and I realized everything's only pointing to an income account. So every time I was generating an invoice, it was reducing our P&L and putting that balance back into our balance sheet.
Oh boy.
And she was like, that's not the right way. And there was about 1,000 of those. And I'm like, I'm not interested in doing that one up.
Yeah. So that's another alternative as well, but you're going to have to do something with those invoices inside of QuickBooks to button up that whole process. Those are the variety of ways to do that. But in our case, taking care of it at the source was the fastest process. It still wasn't the push a button, easy button.
The quickest way to hand over a converted file from that size from desktop to online. I like it was delivered better that way than delivered with all of the billables, because I feel like that we've only done like a part of it. We haven't really truly balanced books out and made sure of it being accurate.
And then as far as this client is concerned, they were none the wiser and that this was a huge problem, right?
No.
They would have.
They, like I said, the checkboxes weren't even populating on our side. So I never thought to even look, because in online, everything shows the box. If you're going to market, you have the option to mark it billable. And the particular client used Bill.com. We used Bill.com for me to manage their payables, and it didn't show up in there either. So the whole thing was really odd, because I've used all these platforms individually for the last 20 something years, and I've never seen that.
That's why there's just always a surprise, isn't there? It always makes it fun.
Yes. Fun. Yes. Okay.
That was sarcasm for those to laugh.
It was fun to learn in the way of, okay, make a note to self to make sure if we do any more conversion projects that this is something you're paying attention to, especially upfront, because it's just not something I would have. When I quote a project, I'm diving into their book, but that's not something I've ever looked at because I've never seen it happen that way.
Yeah.
Now that I know that it can happen that way, I will be looking at additional reports before I estimate for a cost and time.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
That time that was a lot of added time. And before that weekend of doing the work, Dan and I were playing with different ways of how we can accomplish this in a time that wouldn't impact them from a business owner perspective too, because they have going on that I'm like, I can't have them not be in their book for an entire week. That they need to be able to get in.
That's what just really adds to. Unfortunately, sometimes you have to make that mistake to learn, but then that's where it really makes somebody very experienced and skilled, because now when to look and gosh, now I do. It's not something I would have thought of as well. Now I don't do the conversions. I always send them to Dan, but I'm seeming to get a lot more people now that are needing to convert to desktop. And that's really something that I would think to ask as well now. And so, no, it's not fun, but what I do appreciate is learning everything I can about. Don't forget to ask about that. But really add, I feel, to really experience.
Yeah. Yes.
All right. So next week, we are going to be talking. What is the schedule next week? I don't have it up on my screen. We're going to be talking about something.
Hold on. Let me see if I have it. 1 second.
Something
Well, I mean-
down.
Nope, I don't have it. I thought I
So-
did, but I don't.
So before we leave, I wanted to ask Shanna, I know you've been thinking about and working with and trying to teach others your best practices and those types of things. You want to talk about projects on the horizon for Shanna?
Sure. So I guess it was a couple years ago, I had this idea of creating a combination platform for accounting professionals to come in. Having access to Dan School Bookkeeping was part of it. So they would, based off of their knowledge, I would test them as they came in. So I would know how they would be placed and what membership they would qualify for. But that's basically just like a training tool, a training platform. And we would do coaching calls. And then I would also have business owners come to me that are looking for accounting professionals to be placed with. We would take all the information in from basically their intake form and then be able to provide them with, here's some accounting professionals I feel would be a good fit. I don't know why it took me a year and a half into it to be like, my specialty is working with contractors and design and home builders, but that's the field that I should probably specialize in helping. So now I'm taking it in that direction. And so Dan's going to be a big help with that. We're going to do some job costing stuff on the School of Bookkeeping. Really excited. I've dealt with some, other than the conversion project, I've been pretty buying books that have come my way from experienced accounting professionals for designers and home builders and stuff. I think that there seems to be like a lull and not as many of us out there, but there's great opportunity in it. And I can't be the only person that has a little OCD. I don't need for perfection. And I just think that this will be a great tool for anyone who's qualified enough and wanting to learn how to hone in on these additional skills of job costing and different ways of utilizing profit first for your contractors and home designers and stuff like that.
Awesome.
Hey,
We look forward to being a part of that on your journey. But it boils down to good judgment comes from experience, and experience comes from bad judgment.
Why does it have to be that way?
But this allows you to fast track it. So Shauna's already made those bad choices.
Clients, present.
So she's already got the experience coming from those bad judgment calls.
Before I went out on my own.
So you can learn right from the source of the good judgment. And that's the same thing for school bookkeeping, right? We've had tons of poor choices, and let's try it this way. Or
It's the roadblocks that were like, okay, how do we make this
learning opportunities.
Yeah. Well, the ones.
It's probably more like unknown choices. Like, what do I do? Let me choose that way.
Yeah, like
Track. Let me do that and redo it again. We have to do it. It is an incredible way to learn.
Yes, absolutely.
So we will see you next time on the workshop. Shauna, thank you for joining. And Rachel, it's always great to see you.
To help you all.
Exactly. So we will see you next week on the workshop Wednesday. Hopefully everybody has a great week ahead.